Welcome to Briniclereads. Tonight's story is about a town that never forgot. It just chose not to remember. I hadn't planned on coming back to Ridgeway. That's the first lie I told myself. The truth is, I always knew I would. Towns like this don't let you go completely. They stay folded inside you, tucked between old memories and unfinished sentences, waiting for the moment you're weak enough to return. For me, that moment came with a phone call at 6:17 a.m. My sister's voice was steady. Too steady. "Dad passed last night," Claire said. "In his sleep. Doctor says it was natural causes." Natural causes. That phrase followed me all the way from Chicago to Indiana, repeating in my head like a warning I didn't yet understand. Ridgeway announces itself long before you reach the town limits. The road narrows. Cell service fades. The trees lean closer together, their branches forming a canopy that blocks out the sky in patches, like the town is slowly closing its fist around you. The lake appears last. Still. Wide. Reflective. Ridgeway Lake has always been the town's pride. Postcards, calendars, the mural inside City Hall. People say it's peaceful. Calming. I've always thought it looked like something holding its breath. As I drove past the old, "Welcome to Ridgeway" sign, white paint peeling, blue letters faded, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The kind you get when a place remembers you better than you remember yourself. I hadn't been back in 16 years. Yet somehow, nothing had changed. And everything had. The funeral was held at St. Mary's Chapel, the same place my mother's service had been, the same place half the town had been baptized, married, mourned. When I walked in, conversations dipped. Not stopped. Just softened. Heads turned. Eyes lingered a second too long. People smiled. That was the strangest part. Everyone smiled like they'd been waiting for me. "Evelyn," someone said, touching my arm gently. "I'm so sorry." "I'm glad you made it back," another whispered, as if leaving had been some kind of mistake I was finally correcting. They said my name like it still belonged here. At the front of the chapel, my father's casket rested beneath a spray of white lilies. Sheriff Samuel Walker. Protector of Ridgeway. That's what the pamphlet said. I stared at the closed lid, trying to reconcile it with the man who taught me how to shoot, how to drive, how to keep secrets. Claire stood beside it, dressed in black, posture straight, hands folded. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried when she called me either. When she saw me, she nodded. Just once. That was our hug. Mayor Thomas Hale sat in the front row. Of course he did. He rose when I approached, pulling me into an embrace that lingered a moment too long. "Your father was a good man," he said softly. "Ridgeway owes him a great deal." I pulled back and met his eyes. They were warm. Polished. Empty in a way that made my skin prickle. "Thank you," I said. He squeezed my shoulder, a gesture that felt more like possession than comfort, then returned to his seat. During the service, I noticed something else. Everyone knew when to stand. When to bow their heads. When to sigh. Grief moved through the room in unison, like choreography they'd rehearsed. It was beautiful. And it was wrong. Mayor Hale gave the eulogy. Not Claire. Not me. He spoke about my father's dedication, his sacrifices, his loyalty to Ridgeway. He told stories I'd heard 100 times. Stories where my father was always the steady hand, the calming voice, the man who made hard choices so others wouldn't have to. When he finished, the applause came naturally. Too naturally. I didn't clap. I kept thinking about the last time I'd spoken to my father. 3 months ago. He'd sounded tired. Distracted. He'd asked me if I ever thought about coming home. I'd laughed it off. I wish I hadn't. The house smelled like dust and old wood. Somehow, it still smelled like him too. After the funeral, Claire went back to her place. Said she needed rest. Space. I stayed. I walked through rooms that felt smaller than I remembered, touching doorframes carved with old pencil marks. My height, Claire's, years measured and forgotten. In my father's bedroom, everything was too neat. The bed perfectly made. The nightstand cleared except for a lamp and a watch. I picked up the watch. It was heavy. Scratched. Familiar. As I turned it over, something slipped loose and fell into my palm. A key. Brass. Old. Unmarked. I stared at it, my pulse suddenly loud in my ears. My father had always labeled everything. Evidence bags. File folders. Even his tools. This key had no label. No explanation. Just wait. I closed my fingers around it, and for the first time since I'd arrived, the silence in the house felt intentional. Like something was waiting. That night, I lay awake listening to Ridgway breathe. The distant hum of the lake. A floorboard creaking where no one stood. I thought about how grief was supposed to feel, sharp, overwhelming, consuming. Instead, what I felt was unease. Like I'd stepped onto a stage where everyone knew their lines. Everyone except me. As sleep finally crept in, one thought settled heavy in my chest. My father didn't die peacefully. And Ridgway knows why. I slept badly that night. Not because of dreams, because of the absence of them. It felt like the house was holding me awake, listening, waiting for something I didn't know how to give. Morning arrived quietly in Ridgway. No traffic. No distant sirens. Just birds and the soft, rhythmic lap of water against the shore, drifting in through a cracked window like a reminder I hadn't asked for. I lay there longer than I should have, staring at the ceiling I used to trace with my eyes as a child. The faint water stain in the corner was still there, shaped like a continent I never learned the name of. My father said he'd fix it one day. He never did. Funny how small promises are the ones that linger. The kitchen was untouched. No half-empty coffee mug in the sink. No folded newspaper on the table. No note reminding Claire to lock the door behind her. My father had lived alone in this house for years after my mother passed. And yet, it didn't feel lonely. It felt paused. Like he'd stepped out for a moment and hadn't come back yet. I opened cabinets without thinking. Muscle memory. Cups were still arranged by size. Plates stacked with military precision. Control. Order. Silence. That had been my father's way. I made coffee, though I didn't want it, and stood at the window watching the street. A woman walked her dog past the house and waved. I didn't wave back. I don't think she noticed. Claire arrived just after 9. She let herself in like she always had. No knock. No warning. "You're up early," she said, glancing at the untouched coffee. "Didn't really sleep," I replied. She nodded. Acknowledged, but didn't engage. That was Claire now, efficient with emotion, like it was a resource she couldn't afford to waste. She started sorting mail from the counter. Bills. Condolence letters. Envelopes with Ridgway return addresses that all looked the same. People mean well, she said, almost defensively. They just don't know what to say. They seem to know exactly what to say, I answered. The same thing, over and over. She paused, just briefly. That's how it works here. I didn't respond. Somewhere between us sat 16 years of distance. Too heavy to move. Too fragile to touch. After she left, I went back to my father's room. I hadn't planned to snoop. But then again, I hadn't planned to come back either. The closet was organized the way everything else was, shirts pressed, shoes aligned, coats still smelling faintly of cedar and cold air. I knelt and pulled out a small box from the back corner. Inside were old notebooks. The kind my father used to carry everywhere. Sheriff's logs. I flipped one open. Dates. Times. Names. And then, gaps. Entire pages torn out. Not ripped. Removed carefully. Deliberately. My throat tightened. My father didn't erase things unless he believed they were dangerous. Or necessary. I checked the next notebook. More missing pages. I felt that familiar pull in my chest, the one that had driven me into journalism in the first place. The sense that something was wrong, and that ignoring it would cost more than knowing. As I sat there, memories surfaced without warning. My father's voice, low and calm. There are things people don't need to know, Evie. I'd been 14. Angry about something I can't even remember now. Truth matters, I'd argued. He'd looked at me for a long time before answering. So does peace. At the time, I'd thought that was wisdom. Now, it sounded like a warning. That afternoon, I walked into town. Ridgway's main street was just as I remembered, 2 cafes, the hardware store, the diner, and the library sitting quietly at the corner like it had nowhere else to be. People greeted me by name. Asked how long I was staying. Told me my father would be proud. No one asked how I was doing. At the diner, a woman I didn't recognize poured my coffee. New here? I asked. 10 years, she said, smiling faintly. Long enough to know when someone doesn't belong. Her name was Elena. She didn't ask questions. Just watched me with curiosity, not judgment. That felt rare. The library smelled like paper and dust and something older. Martha Collins sat behind the front desk, glasses perched low on her nose. When she saw me, her expression shifted, just slightly. I wondered when you'd come in, she said. Did you? I asked. She smiled. Your father used to say you'd come back when you were ready. That sent a chill through me. I don't think he knew me very well, I said. Martha studied me for a moment, then gestured toward the back. Some things are easier to talk about when surrounded by records, she said quietly. We walked past shelves filled with Ridgway's history, births, deaths, marriages, headlines frozen in time. I noticed something missing. Where are the archives from the late 2000s? I asked. Martha stopped. They were relocated, she said carefully. By who? She met my eyes. Your father signed off on it. Silence stretched between us. I see, I said. But I didn't. Not yet. That night, back at the house, I took the brass key from my pocket and set it on the table. I stared at it for a long time. It felt heavier now. Like it knew something I didn't. Somewhere in Ridgway, there was a door waiting for it. And whatever was behind that door had been buried for a reason. I realized then that my father hadn't just left me a house. He'd left me a question. And Ridgway was hoping I wouldn't ask it. I didn't sleep much after that. The key stayed on the kitchen table all night, catching the moonlight whenever a cloud passed overhead. I kept telling myself it was nothing. An old storage key. A forgotten drawer. But my father didn't keep meaningless things. He kept contingencies. By morning, I'd made a decision I hadn't said out loud yet. I was going to find the door. The sheriff's office sat 2 blocks from the lake, a squat brick building that looked smaller than I remembered. Less powerful. Like a relic the town kept around out of habit rather than need. The sign still read Ridgway Sheriff's Department. But my father's name was gone. That absence hit harder than I expected. I hesitated before going in, the key heavy in my coat pocket. Part of me hoped someone would stop me. Ask what I was doing. Give me a reason to turn around. No one did. Inside, the building smelled like disinfectant and old paper. A deputy sat behind the front desk, mid-40s, unfamiliar face, eyes sharp in a way Ridgway usually discouraged. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm Samuel Walker's daughter," I said. That did it. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something else. Caution. "I'm Deputy Brennan," he said. "What can I do for you?" "I'm just looking around," I replied. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Some doors are locked," he said evenly. "For a reason." I almost laughed. "So I've heard." I walked the halls slowly. Past offices that hadn't been updated in decades. Bulletin boards with curling flyers. A framed photo of my father shaking hands with Mayor Hale, both of them smiling like men who shared more than friendship. The key seemed to pull me toward the back of the building. Down a narrow corridor. Past a door marked records, locked, but not the right fit. Then I saw it. A plain metal door, half hidden behind filing cabinets. No sign. No label. The key slid in smoothly. Too smoothly. The lock clicked open with a sound that felt louder than it should have. Inside was a narrow stairwell leading down. I paused, hand on the railing, heart racing. Every instinct told me this was where my father's silence had led. I went down anyway. The room below was colder. No windows. Just humming fluorescent lights and rows of shelves packed with boxes. Evidence boxes. They weren't labeled with names. Only dates. I walked closer, my breath shallow. 2007. 2008. 2009. My hands trembled as I reached for one. I knew that year. Everyone in Ridgway did. That was the summer a girl disappeared. I hadn't lived here then, but I remembered the headlines. The vague press releases. The way the story had simply faded. I opened the box. Inside were photographs. A bracelet. A notebook. And a name I hadn't heard spoken in 16 years. Lily Carter. My chest tightened. I remembered her now. Dark hair. Crooked smile. Always sitting on the dock with Claire, feet dangling over the water. She'd been 16. And then she was gone. I didn't hear Deputy Brennan until he spoke. "You weren't supposed to find that." I turned slowly. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, not threatening, but not relaxed either. "Why?" I asked. "Because it doesn't exist?" He exhaled. "Because it was buried." "By who?" I demanded. He hesitated. Your father, he said quietly. The words felt like a betrayal and a confession all at once. He closed the case, Brennan continued. Declared it a runaway. No further investigation. I shook my head. That's not like him. Brennan's eyes softened. That's what makes it hard. I left the building with the box burned into my memory, even though I hadn't taken it with me. The lake glimmered in the distance, innocent and calm. I thought about Lily. About Claire. About my father standing between truth and peace. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the key in my hand and realized something terrifying. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a responsibility. And Ridgway was already bracing itself for what I might do with it. Once you know where to look, lies stop hiding. They sit in plain sight, stitched into everyday conversations, passed around like heirlooms no one remembers earning. I started asking questions. Not directly. Not at first. In Ridgway, you don't ask what happened. You ask how people remember it. At the hardware store, I mentioned Lily Carter like an afterthought. The man behind the counter didn't stop smiling, but his eyes shifted, just briefly. Sad business, he said. Kids do stupid things. At the post office, a woman frowned like she was trying to recall a dream. Ran off, didn't she? She asked. That's what they said. They all used the same words. They said. No one ever said who they were. At the diner, Elena poured my coffee without asking. People get uncomfortable when you say her name, she said quietly. I noticed. She leaned closer. When I first moved here, I asked about a missing girl. Next day, my supplier doubled my prices. The day after that, the health inspector showed up. I stared at her. No one threatened me, she continued. They didn't have to. Ridgway just applies pressure. Why stay? I asked. She shrugged. Because running doesn't undo what you already know. That hit too close to home. Deputy Brennan agreed to talk after his shift. We sat in his car by the lake, engine off, windows cracked. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like it hadn't been holding secrets for years. Cases get buried here, he said. Not officially. Just redirected. By the mayor? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Your father was respected, Brennan added. When he said a case was closed, people accepted it. And if he was wrong? Brennan looked out at the lake. Then everyone decided not to notice. The library was quieter than usual when I returned. Martha Collins waited for me near the archives, a folder already in her hands. I can't give you copies, she said. But I can tell you what was removed. She described police reports that stopped mid-sentence. Newspaper articles that were never printed. A sealed court motion that vanished overnight. All signed off by my father, I said. Martha nodded. He cried that day. I closed my eyes. That's when I knew, she continued, that whatever he was protecting wasn't himself. That evening, I confronted Claire. We stood in the kitchen where we'd grown up, the same table between us, the same distance. Lily didn't run away, I said. Claire's jaw tightened. Let it go, she replied. She was your best friend. Silence. She was 16, I pressed. You were with her the night she disappeared. Claire's eyes filled, not with tears, but with fear. I warned her, she whispered. I told her not to go. Go where? Her voice broke. To the lake. The words settled between us like a weight. Claire finally looked at me then, really looked. You think Ridgway forgot her, she said. We didn't forget. We agreed. I felt sick. Agreed to what? To survive, she snapped. To keep our jobs. Our families. Our town. By sacrificing a girl? By sacrificing the truth, she said softly. The difference mattered to her. It didn't to me. That night, I sat alone in my father's house, surrounded by the quiet he'd built. I understood him now. Not enough to forgive him. But enough to know why this town felt staged. Ridgway wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by agreement. And I was the only one left who hadn't signed it. I didn't find my father's confession right away. It found me. On the third night after my argument with Claire, I was packing boxes in the garage, trying to give my hands something to do so my mind would stop circling the same thoughts. That's when I noticed the loose board. It was subtle. Just enough of a gap to catch the light when I shifted my weight. My father had always been meticulous. If something was out of place, it meant he'd left it that way on purpose. I pried the board up. Beneath it was a small metal box. No lock. No label. Inside were cassette tapes. Old ones. Handwritten titles in my father's careful script. For Evelyn. Do not play until I'm gone. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. I found an old tape player in the hall closet. It took 3 tries before I managed to press play. At first, there was only static. Then my father's voice filled the garage. Older. Weaker. But unmistakably his. Evie, he said, and hearing my childhood nickname felt like a hand closing around my heart. If you're listening to this, then I didn't have the courage to tell you while I was alive. I closed my eyes. I need you to understand something, he continued. Everything I did to keep this town from tearing itself apart. I felt anger rise immediately. That familiar justification. Peace over truth. He spoke slowly, carefully, like every word cost him something. There were men involved, he said. Men with money. Influence. Connections beyond Ridgway. When Lily Carter disappeared, I followed the evidence where it led. I leaned forward, breath shallow. It led to places I couldn't expose without destroying families. Not just theirs. Ours. My stomach dropped. I was threatened, he admitted. Not directly. That's not how it works. But I understood what would happen if I pushed. I thought of Mayor Hale's smile. His grip on my shoulder at the funeral. It all made sense now. I made a choice, my father said. I buried the truth so the town could survive. I told myself I was protecting people. His voice cracked. I don't know if that's what I was really doing. Tears blurred my vision. He went on to describe the evidence he destroyed. The reports he altered. The night he told Claire to stay silent. That part broke me. She was just a kid, he whispered. But she was brave. Braver than me. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle a sound I didn't recognize as my own. The tape ended with silence. Then a click. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by oil-stained concrete and memories I didn't know how to carry. My father hadn't been a villain. That somehow made it worse. I confronted Claire the next morning. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just played the tape. She listened without moving, without interrupting, without breathing. At least, it felt that way. When it ended, she sank into a chair. "I thought if I stayed," she said, staring at the floor, "I could make it mean something. Like his choice wouldn't be for nothing." "And did it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. It just rotted." That afternoon, I sat by the lake alone. The water was calm, deceptive in its beauty. I understood my father now. His fear. His exhaustion. The impossible position he'd been placed in. But understanding wasn't forgiveness. And it wasn't justice. He'd given me the truth too late for Lily. But not too late for Ridgway. As the sun dipped low over the water, one thought became clear, solid and unavoidable. Silence had been my father's legacy. What I did next would decide whether it stayed mine. The lake looked the same as it always had. That was the lie. I'd stared at it my entire childhood, through summer heat, winter frost, teenage boredom. I thought I knew it. Thought it was just water and reflection and memory. But lakes don't forget what they're given. They keep it. I went to Deputy Brennan before I went to the mayor. That wasn't strategy. That was instinct. He listened without interrupting as I told him about the tapes, the missing evidence, the key. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. "I figured," he said quietly. "Figured what?" "That if the truth ever came out, it'd be through you." He looked at me then, not like a cop, not like a deputy, but like someone choosing a side. "I can request a search," he said. "But once I do, there's no going back." I thought of Lily. Of Claire. Of my father's voice breaking on tape. "Good," I said. "We shouldn't." The dive team arrived 2 days later. Officially, it was a routine search. Unofficially, the entire town knew what was happening before the first boat hit the water. People gathered along the shore pretending not to watch. Mayor Hale stood with them. Hands folded. Expression calm. When he saw me, his smile never reached his eyes. "You're stirring up old pain," he said gently, like a warning disguised as concern. "Pain doesn't disappear just because it's old," I replied. His voice dropped. "You don't understand what you're risking." I met his gaze. Neither did my father. That was the first time I saw fear flicker across his face. The lake was quiet as the divers went under. Too quiet. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed to avoid the shoreline. Then one of the divers surfaced. He didn't have to say anything. The way he removed his mask was enough. They found her near the old dock. Tangled in debris. Preserved by cold and time and water. Lily Carter had been there all along. The lake never forgot her. It just waited. The town broke after that. Not loudly. Not violently. But in whispers. In closed businesses and drawn curtains. In phone calls that went unanswered. Mayor Hale tried to stop the report. Tried to bury it again. This time, there was nowhere left to hide it. I published everything. Not in a national paper. Not on a flashy platform. I released it locally. I wanted Ridgway to hear the truth in its own voice. The arrests came quickly after. Names people had trusted for decades. Men who'd smiled at funerals. Men who'd shaken my father's hand. Mayor Hale was taken in just after sunrise. No speech. No defense. Just silence. Claire left Ridgeway a week later. She didn't say goodbye to the town. Just to me. I stayed because I thought someone had to, she said, standing by her packed car. Now I know why you ran. I didn't run, I said. She smiled sadly. You survived. As she drove away, I felt something loosen inside my chest. For the first time in years, the silence felt earned. That evening, I returned to the lake. The water rippled softly, catching the last light of the day. I held the brass key in my hand. It had done its job. Some towns never forget. They just wait for someone brave enough to remember out loud. And this time, Ridgeway had no choice but to listen. Ridgeway didn't collapse after the truth came out. That surprised me. I'd expected shouting. Protests. Anger loud enough to crack the sidewalks. Instead, the town went still. Like it was finally exhaling after holding its breath for 16 years. The lake was closed off for weeks. Yellow tape fluttered along the shoreline, reflected in the water like a warning the town could no longer ignore. Tourists stopped coming. The postcards disappeared from store windows. People avoided eye contact. Not because they were ashamed of what I'd done, but because they recognized themselves in it. The library reopened first. Martha called me the morning the missing archives were returned to the shelves. They're back where they belong, she said. Unedited. I went in that afternoon and watched her slide folders into place. Births, deaths, court orders, police reports. History, restored. Not healed. Just honest. That's all the past ever asks for, she told me. To be remembered correctly. I stayed longer than I meant to. Long enough to clean out my father's house. Long enough to sit in rooms where the silence no longer felt rehearsed. I donated his uniforms. Packed away the photographs. Left the notebooks untouched. Some things deserve to stay unfinished. In the garage, I burned the cassette tapes after making copies for the record. As the plastic curled and melted, I whispered goodbye to the man my father had been, and the one he'd tried to be. Deputy Brennan became sheriff. Not because he wanted to. Because the town needed someone who wasn't born into its agreements. He stopped by one evening, hat in hand. You did the right thing, he said. I nodded. Right didn't feel like victory. It felt like weight. On my last night in Ridgeway, I walked to the lake alone. No tape. No barricades. Just water and moonlight and the sound of something finally at peace. I thought about Lily. About how she'd been more than a mystery. More than a body. More than a cautionary tale. She'd been a girl who deserved to grow up. And she hadn't. I dropped the brass key into the water. It disappeared without a sound. Some doors don't need to be opened again. I left Ridgeway before sunrise. The road felt wider this time. The trees less crowded. As the town faded behind me, I realized something I hadn't expected. Ridgeway would remember this. Not the way it remembered before. But honestly. And that mattered. I don't know if towns can heal. But I know this. Silence isn't peace. It's just the absence of courage. And sometimes, remembering out loud is the bravest thing a person can do. That's it. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like the video. Subscribe to briniclereads for more haunting stories. And comment below, would you have told the truth? Or stayed silent like the town did?